we need to think how to further pressurize the Hong Kong government, or is Hong Kong government the right target for us to continue to ask for something? Because it is quite clear that in short term, actually, the Hong Kong government will not offer anything else.
That story is coming up in just a moment. From Seoul, South Korea, you're listening to Asia News Weekly. The world meets in Beijing. Is North Korea developing a missile-launching submarine? And where do women fare best in Asia? These stories and more are on the November 7th edition of Asia News Weekly. Welcome once more to the program. I'm your host, Steve Miller, and I'd like to thank you for listening and downloading this week's podcast. Over the weekend, many of the most influential world leaders will meet in Beijing for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Summit. The individual sessions might offer glimpses as to how the region plans to develop the future, but what is possibly more important will be the outcomes of the ancillary meetings between various world leaders and Chinese President Xi Jinping. United States President Barack Obama and Xi plan to meet between the APEC Summit and the start of the East Asia Summit being held in nearby Myanmar. To say the current relationship between the United States and China is tense would be an understatement, with some saying it's adding to the instability in the Asia-Pacific region. President Xi proposed a new relationship dynamic with Washington in 2013, but that proposal didn't go over too well. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said that the new big power relationship implied no confrontation, no conflict, mutual respect and cooperation for mutual wins. The United States, for its part, is suspect of China's true intentions for this new, quote, power relationship. Given the United States' support for the Philippines and multilateral discussions to resolve territorial disputes in the China Seas, it's unlikely an agreement will result from the sideline meeting. What's more likely is that a groundwork for better understanding can be laid. Indonesia's President Joko Widodo will also meet with President Xi. China is Indonesia's largest trading partner, with $52.45 billion in total trade and almost 300 million indirect investments between the two countries last year alone. Retno Marsudi, Indonesia's foreign minister, said, quote, "This visit is an introductory visit from China as we are discussing the initial ideas on what we can do to cooperate bilaterally and economically and ensure peace and stability in the Asian region for the next 5 years." End quote. It was also rumored that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe would meet Xi during the summit, but Xinhua, China's state news agency, announced no meeting would take place. Abe has spared no efforts in seeking to meet with Xi. His wish will be fulfilled since Beijing, the host of this forum, will undoubtedly receive the Japanese leader with etiquette and hospitality, despite chronic territorial rows and a historical feud with Tokyo. However, that does not necessarily mean Abe's long-sought formal talks with Xi during APEC would come true, which demands Abe extend good faith and take real action to create the proper atmosphere, Xinhua said in an English-language commentary. Sadly, like much of the politics these days, I don't see much getting done in the session or on its sidelines. Real change takes time and effort, and what's important to keep in mind is that meetings such as this one is designed to foster an open road of dialogue. It's those continued discussions that are important, so that in the long run, ideas, goals, and action plans can be implemented that will benefit everyone. What's your opinion of the APEC Summit? Is it a worthwhile meeting, or just an excuse for world leaders to strut out on the world stage? I hope you'll share your thoughts with me. What Asian country empowers women the most? That story's coming up later in the podcast. Earlier this week, it was rumored North Korea was modernizing decommissioned Soviet Golf II-class diesel submarines to carry ballistic missiles. An unidentified submarine was spotted by the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University through satellite imagery. Located in South Hamgyong Province on the country's eastern coast, it's the headquarters for the Maritime Research Institute of the Academy of National Defense Sciences and serves as the DPRK submarine manufacturing facility. While these subs are old, their payloads would enable them to carry missiles that could travel up to 1,500 kilometers, placing several key targets within range. With regard to this issue, it does raise some concern, for it was only September when top military officials said it was doubtful North Korea had a sub capable of firing missiles such as these. Then all of a sudden, 1 month later, they do. Just how good is the intel on North Korea? Well, time and time again we've seen glaring holes in the details that have been printed, what's plausible and what is true. I asked Daniel Pinkston, Senior Analyst and Northeast Asia Deputy Project Director for Crisis Group, what he made of the report.
Well, there were some reports in recent days about that, and blog 38 North ran a piece by Joe Bermudez, and then they had an update after media ran with that story, and there were some other leaked comments from South Korean Defense Ministry officials. And apparently some things have been exaggerated from what I can tell. 38 North said that the type of submarine that they spotted in the commercial satellite imagery was not a Gulf class submarine, but was a smaller submarine, not really large enough to launch missiles, and they could not see any launch tubes or anything. So they're going to continue investigating it, and they're working with their imagery provider to get more detailed imagery and see if they can continue the analysis. But nevertheless, it's a very difficult technology. It would be years down the line, I think, before they would be able to acquire and test and deploy those types of systems.
With regard to North Korea, it's always important to sit back and thoroughly evaluate what's been reported, keeping in mind what is publicly available may not be in line with what can be verified upon scrutiny. What's possibly a more direct threat to South Korea and other nations in the region is North Korea's cyber-attacking capabilities. It's long been discussed that the DPRK was working on various computer games infested with malware. It was hoped that South Koreans, who have a hankering for online games and an overall abysmal internet security, would download the games and infect their computers. Reports surfaced this week that the North has extended that program to mobile devices, attempting to infect some 20,000 devices, according to a report made by the South Korean National Intelligence Service. North Korea denied the activities, stating it was a diversionary tactic by Seoul in the wake of the called-off high-level talks between the two governments. North Korea said it called off those talks because Seoul hasn't prevented an anti-Pyongyang group from launching propaganda balloons. Seoul says it doesn't have the authority to prevent those balloon launches, but has asked the group to stop. In response, the head of the Seoul-based Fighters for a Free North Korea, Pak Sang-hak, said that he does not believe the details about the leaflet should be made secret, but his group will keep it as such for the sake of stability on the Korean peninsula. North Korea has also reportedly started operating a new plant to produce weapons-grade uranium, doubling its current capability. In 2012, the North started building a new facility next to its old uranium plant. It's about 120 meters long and 15 meters wide. The new facility is about the same size as the old one. It recently completed construction and has started operation, a North Korean security official said in Seoul. And one final note, a rumor that was printed in South Korea's Korea Herald. According to Jang Se-yeol, a North Korean defector, North Korea is moving to extend the mandatory military service term for male draftees and recruit more female conscripts in efforts to address its worsening troop shortage. Chang Yong-suk, an analyst at the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies at Seoul National University, says this may be in response to the famine that ravaged the country in the 1990s. Currently, men serving in the DPRK military do so for 10 years, beginning when they're 17. Women, who are said to account for about a fifth of their military, serve for at least 7 years. If this last bit of information is true, it stands to reason Kim might try to bolster appearances, but place greater resources on digital weaponry, where a single operative could inflict greater damage than one in direct combat roles. What are your thoughts? Is digital warfare the battlefield of the future? Please let me know. What's happening in Hong Kong? Well, not a lot this week, and you'll learn more in just a moment. When I think about equality in the workplace, it saddens me that even in the 21st century, women are still fighting for equal footing, even in highly developed nations like the United States. So, when looking at Asia's rating, what nations have the narrowest gap between the sexes? The World Economic Forum recently issued its 2014 Gender Gap Report. Saadi Zahidi, Senior Director for Gender Parity, spoke with VOA's Francis Alonso about this year's results.
Measure gender gaps in over 140 countries, and we've been doing this for about 9 years, and we're looking at health, education, economic participation, and political empowerment criteria. What we find is globally, and this is representing more than 90% of the world's population, we've closed 96% of health gaps, 94% of education gaps, only about 60% of economic participation gaps, and then only 21% of political empowerment gaps. So definitely the areas which need the most work are economic participation and political opportunity. The good news, though, is that we are making, relative to where we started out, the most progress on political empowerment. We've gone up from 14% of that gap being closed to 21% today, and there is also progress on economic participation, although a lot slower.
How has Asia fared? What countries are the top performers?
The Philippines is still the highest ranking Asian country. It still stays in the top 10 overall, and it's followed by, in the Asia-Pacific region, followed by New Zealand and Australia at 13 and 24. But besides that, the region does not perform extremely well because in the top 50, the only other country is Mongolia at 42. Japan is at 104, China is at 87, and India is down to 114. And the last ranking country in the region is Pakistan at 141.
What is it about Asia in particular that it lags behind?
So we're seeing very different patterns in these countries. Japan, as an example. This is a country that has fully closed health and education gap, and in fact, more women are now starting to go to university as compared to men. And so the entry-level talent in the country is starting to be majority female, and yet when we look at economic participation of women, the labor force participation rates are amongst the lowest of any of the OECD countries. And that also is a pattern that's visible in political empowerment with a very low number of female ministers and parliamentarians.
In your mind, which is the rising star in Asia that has slowly, progressively moved up the list?
So there are several countries that are making progress relative to where they were. The Philippines staying in the top 10 does not mean that it is stagnating. It's actually moving forward over the last 9 years and has been moving forward at a pace that has still kept it in the top 10 because other countries have been moving forward fast too.
What can you tell me about China?
China has dropped slightly in the rankings this year from 69 last year to 87 this year, and most of that change is coming from the health and survival pillar of our index. And primarily what that is showing is the sex ratio at birth and how far below the natural threshold that is. So there is still a very strong preference for sons that's leading to that. On the other hand, China is doing fairly well as compared to previous years to its own past performance on economic participation opportunity. Women's labor force participation is now 70% as compared to 84% for men. So that gap is narrowing.
Not stated in the interview, South Korea, for all its advancements in business, ranks lower than Japan, down 6 places from last year's report at 117 out of 141 nations. Indonesia, the region's largest democracy, ranks at 97, down 2 places from 2013. Singapore also slipped 1 spot to come in at 59 this year on the report. And this report now more than ever begs the question: why are so-called developing nations more empowering for women? And why haven't China, Japan, and South Korea learned the same lessons of equality? Don't miss our other podcast, Asia Now. It's released every Wednesday and features stories and interviews from the Asia-Pacific region. This week, I spoke with Joanna Hosniak, Deputy Director General of the Citizens Alliance for North Korean Human Rights, about the current matter before the United Nations and why the DPRK is so adamant about trying to get the world to change its view of the Hermit Kingdom. Up until recently, there was little change in the situation on the streets of Hong Kong. Dozens of police, armed with batons and shields, swept the Mong Kok area around 2 a.m. Thursday morning. It's a highly polarized area where many anti-protest supporters have gathered in the past. Yvonne Luong, a member of the Federation of Students, spoke with the Voice of America on the streets of Hong Kong, sharing what she feels needs to be the focus of the pro-democracy movement.
We need to think how to further pressurize the Hong Kong government, or is Hong Kong government the right target for us to continue to ask for something? Because it is quite clear that in short term, actually, the Hong Kong government will not offer anything else.
To be truthful, she's absolutely correct. While discussions do need to take place with the Hong Kong government, ultimately, this will be Beijing's decision. With the APEC Summit taking place in Beijing, it's easy to see why there's been little movement on reaching an agreement between the protest groups and the city. Attention simply has been focused elsewhere. Some student leaders have proposed going to Beijing to discuss the matter during the APEC Summit, but it's unclear if they will be allowed to go or just who would make that trip. Reports are also surfacing that the students might enlist the help of Hong Kong's former chief executive to help make that trip happen. As events continue to unfold on the streets and with the Occupy movement, I'll be sure to share those details via social media. What else has happened this week you may have missed? Well, let's take a look with the weekly brief. It may have been Captain Kirk who first said, "Space, the final frontier." But it's the Chinese who have made the biggest splash in the heavens this past week. State media reported that it completed its first return mission to the moon and back last weekend. The unmanned probe was the latest step forward for Beijing's space program. The space module traversed 413,000 kilometers, the farthest any mission by China's State Administration of Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense. The mission was launched to test technology to be used in the Chang'e 5, China's fourth lunar probe, which plans to gather samples from the lunar surface. An expected launch date is set for 2017. Kunming, located in the southwestern province of Yunnan, China, suffered a horrific knife attack earlier this year, resulting in the death of 31 people. Hassan Muhammad and 2 others were convicted of leading a terrorist group, which planned and carried out the attack at the city's railway station on March 1st and have been sentenced to death. Hassan Muhammad appealed that decision, but according to the Xinhua news agency, that appeal was rejected. The next step in the judicial process is for the death sentences to be reviewed by China's Supreme Court. The 2 underage sons of Ji Jinping have filed what most considered to be the first lawsuits against Malaysia Airlines for negligence after the mysterious disappearance of flight MH370. In addition to the suit filed against the airlines, the family is suing the Malaysian government, civil aviation authorities, the immigration department, and the Air Force for negligence. Under international law, the burden of proof is on the airline to prove it was not responsible for the deaths, so it's unclear as to how successful these suits will be. For the second time in as many years, Educational Testing Service, the company that administers the United States SAT college entrance tests, have announced anomalies with scores submitted from South Korea and China. They are withholding the scores of those who took the test on October 11th based on specific reliable information there may have been cheating. The company referred in a statement to organizations that seek to illegally obtain test materials for their own profit, to the ultimate detriment of all students. ETS says it hopes to complete the investigation and release valid scores in time for universities to make early admission decisions. No announcement was made on how many were affected by this delay, but Tom Ewing, a spokesman for the company, said the scores were being held based on nations of residence, not test location. Last week, a 32-year-old man was found guilty of killing his 40-day-old son by repeatedly throwing the infant in his home. What was the penalty for this horrific crime? A measly 2.5 years. Yi Guangwu, spokesman and judge for the Seoul Western District Court, said, The court gave a light punishment because the murder of his son was discovered while he was in prison and being investigated for another crime, an attempted murder. It's an absolutely disgusting sentence and an abysmal excuse. The fact the father was already in prison has nothing to do with this particular case, and the sentence smacks of indifference. In fact, it's disheartening to witness such a lack of respect for life exhibited by this decision. American Kenneth Bae has now completed 2 of his 15 years in a North Korean labor camp, punishment for what the DPRK said were hostile acts against the state. Quote, "It is an anniversary our family did not want to have to celebrate. While Kenneth remains a prisoner in North Korea, our lives are also held captive, filled with unspeakable heartache and anxiety." End quote. That was from a statement released by the family, who continues to appeal for the North Korean government to let him go. And finally, Cambodia's World Heritage Site Angkor Wat won an online poll organized by Archaeological Institute of America as this year's Archaeological Site of the Year. Having been there earlier this year in January, I have to say it's easy to see why. The ruins took my breath away, and I'd love to go back. 4 days just simply weren't enough to fully explore the sites, and I can't wait to do so again. Believe it or not, those are all the stories for this week's show. But before I go, here are a few of the comments you've left on articles and podcasts from the previous week. First up, Ray Munakata left this comment on Facebook. "Who is shaming Japan? It's definitely not the Asahi Mr. Prime Minister. It's you. It's the Senkai and the LDP for whitewashing history, ignoring war atrocities, and burying the words of your elders." Douglas Stingley left a few comments this week, both on our Asia Now podcast and on Article Share, stating that the recent activity by China made him feel a little uneasy about how the status quo is changing. And Anthony Murphy left a rather whimsical comment about North Korea's criticism over what it sees as a U.S.-led effort to tarnish its image on human rights by saying the South should counter by saying they'll shed the U.S.-led campaign when the North sheds its ties with China. Those are some great comments and just an example of what was shared this past week. For everyone who did take the time to leave them, I truly do thank you for that, and I truly do value each and every single comment that is shared, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on our website, or on Facebook, or coming through Twitter. This week, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts about the stories as well, and you can leave those on the comments on Facebook or Twitter. If you haven't found us on social media, those addresses are really easy. On Facebook, just go over to the Asian News Weekly page, or on Twitter, look for Asian News Weekly or my personal account, Steve Miller ANW. You can also send an email to the show with your questions and feedback, letting us know what you like or what you don't. You can even include an audio file if you want to leave your comment that way. Just drop a line to podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. You can play and download all of our episodes on our website, but if you prefer the show in podcast form, look for us on iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please share it with your friends and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. You can find more news in our daily Asia Brief podcast. It's released every Monday through Thursday morning with the region's key stories to keep an eye on. Well, my friends, that is it for this week's Asia News Weekly podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, I'm Steve Miller. Asia News Weekly is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.